All right, welcome to the PolyPsych podcast. This is your host, Anthony Lindsay, and I'm here with Kyra from the Ohio State University. All right, let's jump straight into it. So, you're about to complete a study on the effects of traumatic brain injuries in adolescents on sleep in adulthood. What were some of your coolest findings, like so far? And can you shed some light on traumatic brain injuries? Because I hadn't even heard not heard I've heard of brain injuries, but I haven't even read like a literature review on traumatic brain injuries. So I'm curious, like what the existing research says and what you're taking your research.
So traumatic brain injuries have really come into light recently with chronic traumatic encephalopathy. The acronym for that is CTE. And that's what you hear about when you hear about the football players and concussions. Yeah, so recently people have started to figure out that when you have a brain injury, it doesn't just stop after the symptoms of a concussion go away. And so when you have a really bad traumatic brain injury or multiple of them, what you'll see is cognitive defects, and then you'll also see problems with sleep and then mood disorders. So these types of symptoms persist for years afterwards, and it depends on severity and also how many concussions have happened in the time span. So the problem with multiple mild traumatic brain injuries is that your brain doesn't have a chance to heal. So you'll get a concussion, and then that's pretty bad, but then 2 weeks you'll heal. But if you're playing football, you get a concussion, you think you're fine after a week, and you go back and you play again. Then your brain gets hit again, and it goes into an even longer recovery period, and that sort of builds and snowballs into these diseases like chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or just having problems down the road with cognitive defects. And then sleep is a big issue. So we wanted to look at sleep particularly.
Okay, so the I think I saw a movie where they like detailed it, and it was really cool. How like your brain literally smashes against the inside of your skull. Yeah.
Will Smith just did the movie Concussion, which is about the man that discovered CTE, which is a very recent disease. And the NFL came back with a ton of backlash on it. It's very reminiscent of Big Tobacco and how Big Tobacco tried to convince everyone that you weren't getting cancer from their cigarettes. The NFL pulled a very similar stunt with trying to convince everyone that no, you weren't actually having like huge brain damage by playing football. And they used a bunch of fallacious the papers. They had their own scientists going out and producing really false science to prove this point. But eventually, it ended up being overwhelming. You had thousands of families that were suing the NFL to try to get some sort of payment for their loss. I mean, this disease, it's like Alzheimer's, but much more accelerated. So you could be 50 and you have symptoms of Alzheimer's. And then also really, really bad depression comes with this too. So you'd see like Mike Weber is a perfect example. He was the guy that started everyone looking at CTE. It was his brain that started this sort of domino effect. But yeah, he had really bad depression and just couldn't function in society. And people didn't know that when they signed up to play football, they could also be signing up to really have a very shortened lifespan and then also have major mental issues.
There was also a Bengals player who he was a wide receiver and completely healthy. Mm-hmm. At least on the outside, he appeared to be completely healthy. And he was standing on the back of a truck, just a regular like SUV, and it drove forward and he fell out of the back and he hit his head. And I mean, granted, that would cause a concussion for sure in almost all of us, but like it shouldn't have killed him, but it did. He died from it. And they examined his brain, and it turned out that this 20-something-year-old wide receiver, this super athlete, he had the brain of like a 70-year-old man, and it's like he hit the ground, and that was it. The lights were completely turned off. So I guess my next question is like, it's slowly becoming common knowledge that not only does the NFL know about this, but this is significant as far as like the health ramifications. So do you think the culture will gradually shift away from contact sports and specifically football?
Well, one of the things that the NFL was worried about is they said if just 10% of mothers decide that football is unsafe for their child, that could be the end of football, because right now it's so competitive where you're starting kids out in Pee Wee football and they'll be 7, 8 years old and they're running at each other. I mean, granted, it's not as intense, but when you start that young with contact sports, it can have issues. I mean, we had at Ohio State just a couple of years ago, a player that ended up committing suicide, and he texted his mom just a day before that these concussions had really messed up his brain, and he just couldn't go on. I mean, he's a college player. He was like 21, I want to say, like early 20s. So that's incredibly young to be having these sort of issues. So, I mean, I think that you will see a little bit of a shift, but then again, the NFL is a $9 billion industry, and money is what really drives the changes. So I don't know if you will, but at least we're starting to see some changes in the way the game is played, such as targeting being very, very harshly punished now. I mean, you're getting players thrown out of the game for targeting, which I completely agree with. I mean, that's one way to sort of cut down on it. But then again, when you're having two 250-pound men run at each other and immediately stop, and then that's like a 30 miles per hour car crash in terms of a concussion.
The NFL, like, it has an amazing amount of money, and I think the running statement against the NFL is that if you go against them, they will simply drop a Brinks truck on you. So they will spend an enormous amount of money to counter any message that you do have. So, and I think that may speak to how corporations are as a whole, because you did say that the tobacco industry did the exact same thing. And I think any industry, if you were to attack it at its base, like, they would just counter message. I mean, it's a part of their marketing is that, hey, this is an opportunity. We need to take this in a different direction. This conversation can't go this way. Like, my wife is currently pregnant and with almost certainly going to be a super athlete, because I'm 6'4", so I expect for my child to be enormous. But I will never let my child play football. Like, it's just not going to happen. So do you think that sentiment is going to be carried over? Do you think that 10% of fathers and mothers, do you think that they will say, like, no, you can't play football? You think we'll shift away from it?
Yeah, I personally, I'm the same way. I mean, I would never let my own child play football. And I would, just like I would never let them play boxing. You know, I think boxing is more understood to be very detrimental, just because that's been something that's been carried along for a long time. And I would say that boxing is not nearly as big as it was probably about 60 years ago. But I don't know if the NFL or football would decline, because it is such a money-making industry. It's the American dream. I mean, it's used by so many athletes that come from lower economical stances. I mean, you'll have kids that are being told to keep pursuing your dream of football. The only way you're going to get out of this city, this town, is through football. And if you have a choice of, okay, I'm going to have major health issues at 50, or I might die when I'm 25 because I might get caught up in gang violence. Also, just like they're young kids too. When you're 50 sounds a very long time away when you're 17.
That's very true. And the average salary of an NFL athlete is $1.9 million per year, which is almost 50 times higher than the average salary for everyone else. Speaking monetarily, I mean, if you ask most Americans, would you trade 10 years on the back end of your life for $1.9 million? I think most people would say, yeah, for sure. Who wants to live to be 87 anyway, you know? So I don't know. I guess it's a two-part question. Do you think that that most people know about CTE now? And do you think that this is just the price you pay? Like, you want to be in the NFL, you want to play football, you want to get a free college education. It's going to cost you 10 years.
Yeah. I think CTE definitely is more well known, especially with the movie coming out. And then you do hear, I mean, we just had recently a huge study come out that said over almost 99% of the brains that were donated to this study had signs of CTE from old NFL players. So I think it's more understood now that there are definite, 100% undeniable disadvantages and dangers of playing football. But also, like you said, you see your Facebook comments saying, well, this is what they signed up for. They're getting millions of dollars. But it's not just like Alzheimer's where you lose your memory. It's you lose who you are as a person. And you'll hear people that have this disease talk about that and how they lost their families. It's exceptionally difficult on families. You basically become disabled because you can't remember things. You have violent outbursts and you're incredibly depressed. So it's something that I don't think people realize the intensity of the disease, because it's not just 10 years off your life. It's 10 years off your life, if not more, plus the years leading up to those final years are incredibly difficult. So maybe more education on the symptoms of the disease might be needed instead of just that it's one bad thing to have.
Huh. All right. Last question for real this time. If I made you the commissioner of the NFL, you're the commissioner of the NFL. Like, how do you fix this problem? Because I've heard that they were contemplating switching to leather helmets because they wouldn't be able to run into each other head first anymore. They would actually have to improve their technique and not lead with their brain anymore. So, like, if I made you commissioner tomorrow, like, how do you fix this concussion problem?
So the only way I can really think of it is if you look at physics, it's the equation for force is just force equals mass times acceleration. So the only thing that you can really change to decrease the force, which is what's causing the brain injury, is mass or acceleration. So you can't run slower, but if you look at the size of the NFL players over the past years, it's increased astronomically. I mean, they aren't just these 170, 200-pound guys. I mean, they're huge men running at each other as fast as they can, and that creates more of a force. Mm-hmm. So when you have these big forces coming towards each other and then they automatically stop on a dime, no helmet is going to be able to hold the brain inside of it's floating in this liquid. So the brain then rushes to the front of the head and then hits the skull, actually. And that's what's causing the damage, is that rapid deceleration. So the only way I could really think of it is you obviously don't want to have targeting, which we've already done, but maybe decreasing the size of the players themselves. That might decrease some of the force that they're experiencing.
I've never heard that. You put the NFL players on a diet plan. You have a 205-pound weight limit in the NFL.
Yeah, I don't know if that would be plausible or not, but that's like honestly because we've reached the point where our helmets are sophisticated enough that they are protecting essentially now the skull instead of the brain. And there's really nothing more you can do to protect the inside of the brain because it's floating in that liquid. And what it is the rapid deceleration. And then the brain rushes to the front of the skull and it ends up hitting, it's an internal contusion. So that's where the damage is from.
Well, I hope that they get it fixed because it's an obvious health issue. And I don't know if football is ever going to go away. I know their ratings are down significantly, but I don't know if the NFL will ever go away. So this seems like just one of those things. Like we just chalk up to, you box for 15 years. Right. Yeah, you're going to have
nature of the beast.
Yeah. I don't know. I hope that they fix it. But anyway, thank you for sitting with us today. I appreciate it, Kyra.